Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen from many different parts of the world. You are welcome to our third Where Three Countries Meet Fireside Chat, Trading Beyond the Tariffs, organized by the HBBA Global, HBBA Canada, and HBBA Hungary. My name is Susanna Tothli, the founder and the CEO of HBBA Global. Believing or not, 5 days ago, Nicholas and I were making a presentation representing our business community about our trilateral economical connections at the Global Britain Trade Expo in London at the Queen Elizabeth Conference Centre. Next Tuesday, the Embassy of Hungary will host our valued HBBA members and international guests, where we'll be organizing the side event of the London Tech Week. It's my honor to welcome our keynote speakers and our amazing guests from different parts of the world. Thank you for joining us, Judith Czako, the Investment and Trade Attaché at the Embassy of Hungary in London, Michael Wilmot, Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner at the Consulate General of Canada in Los Angeles, and Paul Doherty, President and CEO of the Digit Group. The chair of this session is Dr. Nicholas Jeffrey, who is a United Nations ambassador, the founding partner of Impresario and Partners, and CEO of the HBBA Canada. I'm kindly asking you, dear guests, to unmute yourself, please. Thank you so much. And use the chat, make information, put questions, and Sean and I will do our best to work in the background properly. So I would love to hand it over to you, Nicholas, please. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
So thank you, Susanna. The beautiful thing about presenting after Susanna is she said most of the things that I have to say as the introduction, but I will go through it again. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. And as you look at the Zoom links from around the world, so a warm digital welcome to you from wherever you are, just to this, the third fireside chat entitled Trading Beyond Tariffs. My name is Nicholas Jeffrey, and as Susanna said, I'm the founding partner of Impresario and the CEO of our host for today's event, HBBA Global. So over the past 100 days, since the US administration has changed with President Trump at the helm, we've seen global markets step cautiously into a new economic rhythm, one shaped by calibration rather than the original strategy of disruption. The press has named the US policy TACO. Trump always chickens out. It's derogatory, yes, but the roller coaster of uncertainty is actually bigger than the issue of the tariff themselves. If we'd just gone along and said, I'm charging everybody another 10%, you'd have probably had a less disruptive environment. But the fact that it's gone from 151% to 51% to 10% to back up to 40 means that business leaders like ourselves just cannot plan. And it's actually hurting Americans as much as it's hurting their trade competitors. So in many ways, the first quarter of 2025 and the first 100 days of the US administration has been about navigating a new world order, no longer defined solely by tariffs and trade barriers, but defined by digital frameworks, by new strategic alliances, and the urgent pivot that we've seen towards smarter, more resilient economies, a bit like the Gulf states. For us trade professionals, this moment is less about defending the old rules and more about redefining the playing field. We're seeing bilateral and multilateral agreements spring up all over the place, expanding beyond the traditional scope. We now see people integrating climate frameworks, AI governance, and wow, there's a really big topic, and digital identity and urban infrastructure and security, and trying to mash them all up into what is the foreign trade policy. In the EU, green trade still remains the driving force. I'm struggling to work out how powerful that is, but Brussels has really doubled down on the carbon border adjustment mechanism, whatever that means, which is sort of beginning to shape the export behavior well beyond Europe. In North America, we're seeing a renewed emphasis on energy security and digital trade corridors, especially between Canada and the US, and there is still a relationship, but also between Canada and its various provinces. And we're seeing a renewed emerging partners for Canada in the Indo-Pacific region. In Asia, digital trade-free zones are setting the pace for the next generation of commerce. The physical impact from AI agents and LLMs are no longer a media scare story. We're seeing companies trimming entry intakes and middle management is being scourged, and it's happening globally across these service industries. So whilst we're looking at trading beyond tariffs and the impact of the US, we're also looking at the impact of the AI happening at exactly the same time. And these will have an impact in this term of 3 to 4 years. Across this, I see noticeable trend emerging. In the last 30 days, I've seen a shift from friction-based trade policy, tariffs, quotas, and hard lines, to a system of shared value and digital interoperability. My question is, does it include the US or not? This is the third Fireside chat entitled Trading Beyond Tariffs. And it's an invitation for us to explore where trade is heading and when the traditional levers are no longer defining the full picture. So as Zuzanna said, we're joined by three remarkable speakers. Judith, as Zuzanna said, is the investment and trade attaché at the Embassy of Hungary in London. Beautiful building, and spent some glorious evenings and afternoon there. Thank you. And she brings a deep European and US perspective on innovation-driven diplomacy and the shifting role of Central Europe across border trade and investment. And Hungary is doing spectacularly well at foreign direct investment, especially its percentage of Chinese investment into Europe. And hopefully she'll help us to understand how, and more importantly, why. Michael, and thank you very much for joining us. I know it's very early in the morning in LA, Consular and Senior Trade Commissioner at the Consulate General of Canada in Los Angeles. And Michael will hopefully offer us an insight into Canada's strategic positioning in the Pacific Rim and how North American partnerships are evolving around tech, clean energy, and digital infrastructure. Paul Doherty, President of CEO. Paul and I go back 10, 15 years. We've known each other a long time, and he's the CEO of the Digit Group. Paul is not only an award-winning architect and the founder or founding father of building information, but he's got a favored position within the White House in the US, having been invited on several trade missions with President Obama and President Trump. And hopefully he'll be able to share with us the perspective on what's happening at home in the land of the free and the home of the brave. So together we'll examine how governments, cities, companies are now trading intelligence, infrastructure, and building new corridors of trust and exploring how the new export challenges and the new export corridors are building up. And perhaps more critically, we'll look at how diplomacy and design can co-author trade strategies and trade strategies that are more agile, more digital, and more sustainable, and in fact, more human. So let's begin. Paul, may I start with you? Paul, are you here?
Well, since I'm from the home of the brave and the instigator of this trade tariff stuff, of course, yeah, thank you for setting that up and being the lone American on this panel. I just want to say I'm not involved with policy. I'm not an elected official. I'm just a private citizen that gets wrapped up in a lot of this stuff. I like to say that there was a documentary made about my life. It was called Forrest Gump. for some reason, I get involved with things that I'm not sure I'm supposed to be listening to. And that has a lot to do with the leadership around the world, which I think is very relevant in today's discussion. Um, I lived in China for 12 years in Shanghai and made friends with people that were working on the Beijing Olympics at the time, the Summer Olympics in 2008. I was working with the Expo, the in 2010 in Shanghai, the World Expo. And with that, I got introduced to elected officials there that are now leadership, including my friend President Xi. So yeah, I am Forrest Gump. I mean, literally, I know these people. But what happened was when I was working over there, we were working on taking American goods, products, and services and distributing them into infrastructure projects that were called smart cities. What happened was when the Chinese were putting in their high-speed rails to connect these cities, once you got to the city, you were still using taxis and everything else. So they had to build subways and whatnot. So there was a lot of technology and innovation that was put into play there. That also then caught the attention of the White House because President Obama's people said, "You're a private citizen working directly with the CCP. Tell us what you're doing." From there, we were then put onto a trade mission that had us go into the Middle East, again, to show what we were doing in China, but also, again, to promote American goods, products, and services. From there, I was introduced to a deputy crown prince named Mohammed bin Salman. So MBS is a person that I know. Also, the Al Nahyan family, the ruling family out of Abu Dhabi, we were introduced to, and the Al Thani family in Doha and Qatar. So, with all of this access to power, we were given permission to start to take a look at large scale projects. The one in Saudi Arabia wound up being part of Vision 2030, which is now called NEOM, that I wrote about the city of the future. So, the world's largest project, actually, the largest project in the world since the Roman Empire, is being built right now. Because of that, the global supply chain was something that I just thought was always going to be there, right? The globalization effects, where we could source from anywhere. So we made a lot of friends in Europe. We made a lot of friends in Canada, and of course in Asia, in order to build these monstrous projects, because it wasn't just the U.S. alone being part of the supply chain. Then we got introduced to the Trump administration because of my connections back into China. And he invited me to be part of his entourage when he visited Beijing. I actually sat at the state dinner. I sat in between Jack Ma and Yao Ming, and I'm a kind of like an average height guy. Uh, Jack Ma is very, very short, and Yao Ming, of course, is over 7 feet. So they call us the ladder table because we kept on going up. But what was interesting about that entire experience was that he was very grateful because we were able to introduce ministries that they did not have access to and whatnot, because I'm private, right? And I'm friends with these folks. So when he was reelected this time around, it was something that I knew after talking with his administration and whatnot that he was going to have a large scale effort in reestablishing the US not as the money bags, as he calls it, the deep pockets of the world, that everyone should have their own fair share that way. And he felt that by going through a tariff reimagining, that he would be able to make it more fair, right? That for a long time he felt that the US was being taken advantage of. Now, as a private businessman, I kind of took a cautious approach to this, knowing that the storm was brewing. But what was really concerning was not just my projects abroad and what these tariffs were going to do, especially to my budgets, but more importantly, what was going to go on at home, right? So
Yeah.
we're feeling a direct effect, Nicholas, about, groceries, simple things, the price of gasoline. The U.S. economy is going through a cold, but I feel, especially working overseas with these large scale projects, I feel like America's cold is turning into pneumonia in certain markets for others. So, where is this going? If you read Donald's book called The Art of the Deal, this is kind of that rope-a-dope effect. I'm going to say something, but I may not do it. But keep them on edge. Don't show your cards. But sometimes in business, that could work in a private project if you're doing a real estate project in Manhattan. I'm not sure if that really translates well into the world of diplomacy, decades long, century long relationships between people, and also having a better understanding that, yeah, America first is great, but America first doesn't mean that everyone else loses. So we're in a very interesting state right now here in the domestic US.
Well,
I'll be
particularly
traveling overseas.
if you were looking at the steel industry, just
Mm.
the information that's come out this morning, 75,000 jobs lost in the last 60 days. And it's supposed to be improving the market, and it clearly has got a domestic derogatory effect.
Well, in that case, yes, but U.S. Steel is also partnering up, and that's again part of this rope-a-dope effect with Nippon Steel, right? So they're going to have a partnership, not an acquisition. So that means that again, you got to take your medicine in order to get better, right? And that's the philosophy of this administration. Is it going to work across all industries? I don't. I just off the top of my head, I don't see that happening. But I think there's going to be a lot of traditional measures that are going to be challenged. Like you just said, you can hop right on that headline from this morning. And I mean, I have Bloomberg on all the time, just going, it's like a sporting event right now. There's a play-by-play going on. What I'm looking for is the color commentary. So I'm really interested to hearing, our other fellow panelists discuss, what they're hearing from where I'm at. I'm really interested in Michael's perspective, being part of the Canadian trade administration in LA, right? Because I'm sure he's seeing it as well. What's happening here domestically, and then I'll be traveling over to the Middle East by the end of this month, and I will get a firsthand effect about what his travel meant to that region over there last month. One thing that I want to just throw out there is that I was briefed. Unfortunately, had a family emergency that in the Saudi into Qatar and finally over into the UAE. But the big deals are not the deals that were announced. $500 billion investment in the US by KSA, 1.2 trillion by Qatar and 1.4 trillion by Abu Dhabi. Those were headlines. But what was hidden underneath were the laws that the Trump administration had to jump through in order to get GPUs and that type of technology out of the US and placed in foreign countries because the Biden administration made that unlawful. And to undo the law, you'd have to go through Congress. He didn't have time. So, what was not announced in the media was that all of those announced supercomputer data centers for AI that are going to be put in those three countries are now part of the US Embassy. This is data embassies, meaning that that's sovereign soil of the United States. So that's how come the GPUs can actually be sent over there. That actually then brings up a thing about trade that you were mentioning as in your opening, Nicholas, that should we be treating our own data as our own sovereign soil? Because at the time, everyone's thinking, oh, well, we're going to have this AI thing, and I'm throwing my data up into the cloud. There's lots of hallucinations that happen because of that, because we're not trusting the data. What happens when we control our own data? We have our own cybersecurity, just like the US embassies now are saying these data centers are part of the United States. Well, what happens when it's part of Nicholas or it's part of me or it's part of anyone on this call? And we're responsible for that. And AI touches the data to improve what we are doing, how we live, and that type of thing over time. It's a very interesting concept. That was very clever what they
And
came up
I
with.
think that just at the moment, whether you call it a perfect storm or an imperfect storm, with everything that's going on with the administration and the effect that it's having around the world at the same time, in the same 4 year cycle as what is likely to happen with I think it's both exciting and terrifying in the same breath. So thank you, Paul. I'm delighted to have you on board, and we'll circle back round towards the end if there's any more questions. But again, thank you very much indeed for your time. But I do have to just end on one. How come you became a session pianist with David Bowie?
Yeah, back in the day, I was actually standing in line, signing up for my next selection of courses for the next semester at New York Institute of Technology. That's where I went to architecture school. And there was a guy standing in front of me because back then there was no online. You had to stand in line and hopefully get into the classes, right? And he had staff music. I'm a classically trained pianist, and I was watching him do his writing his music. It was awful. So I stopped him And he said, "Wow, you really know your music. I'm a sound engineer at SIR Studios. Why don't you come on down and help out a band that just lost their keyboard player? Just sit in for a few sessions. It would really help them out." Well, I quit school that Monday. My mom loved that, and I became a Warner Brothers recording artist. And what happened is, I was then placed into this rotation in New York City. That there's lots of guitar players, lots of bass players, lots of drummers, but then not a lot of keyboard players. So I got to sit in with David Bowie's band, and it was terrifying. I was 21 years old, and here David Bowie walks into the sound studio. I froze, but
That's wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very
yeah.
much indeed. Great to have you on board. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. So next, Judith, delighted to have you on board. We keep switching countries. It's very funny. So sometimes she's in London and sometimes I'm in Hungary and vice versa. And we were only speaking yesterday. And I'm thinking, isn't this bizarre that you're dialing me on a British number and I'm dialing you back on a Hungarian number? So delighted to have you here. Thank you very, very much indeed. What would be really useful is if you just give us a little bit of your background, because you have had experience in the US market and in the Hungarian market and the British market. It'd be beautiful just to have a quick introduction of your role and some of the things that you've been experiencing.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Nicolas, Susanna, for having me on board today. I'm really grateful to be part of this initiative, especially after learning how successful the first two rounds of these online meetings have been. So welcome, everyone. I'm Judith Czako, Investment and Trade Commissioner in London at the Embassy of Hungary in London. Well, as for my background, very briefly, before starting my so-called diplomatic career, I used to work for the Hungarian Investment Promotion Agency, which is a governmental agency responsible for getting in foreign direct investments to the country for more than a decade. And in 2020, 2015, sorry, I started my first diplomatic role in New York at the Consulate General in New York. So I was pleased to learn that we are joined by a colleague of mine, actually, who is based in Los Angeles representing Canada. So I used to be in the same position, based in New York, representing Hungary and being responsible for investment and trade connections between the United States and Hungary. I spent there 6 fantastic years. It was wonderful to live in the US and learn about the business culture of the Americans, and of course did my best to bring in more and more US investors to Hungary. And since 2021, I'm based in London, actually the same position. It's only the country that I'm responsible for that shifted from the US to the United Kingdom. Here, I'm responsible mostly for Hungarian companies finding their ways on the UK market. So basically boosting Hungarian export, which is very important in such a small country as Hungary. But I'm also very much involved in the foreign direct investors, the UK investors that have already established their footprints in Hungary or that are planning to start new greenfield investments or further expand their presence in Hungary. I thought, Nicolas, if I have 2, 3 more minutes, I thought about introducing the country as well. I'm not sure whether everyone
Yes,
is
I think it would be,
familiar.
yeah, I think that would be a lovely idea. But I also think what would be really helpful
Sure.
is to get an understanding of why, not what, but why. Because you can clearly see that the foreign direct investment group of Hungary, and especially its relationships with China, is doing spectacularly well. Every week I see something on LinkedIn about another company coming and another company expanding, and the automotive industry, how strong it is in Hungary. And that I think would be really interesting to get your perspective on why Hungary is standing out, because sometimes it's seen as the black sheep of the family of Europe, and it's not necessarily the easiest place to be in. But I think it would be really understanding to why these large corporations that honestly have the choice of going anywhere choose Hungary. I think that would be really useful, Judith, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, yes, indeed, absolutely. But to put it in a better perspective, let me just say a couple of words, some data about the size of the country. Hungary is a relatively small country compared to the US or Canada or UK or China, just to come up with some that we have already mentioned. So it's in the heart of the Europe, in Central Eastern Europe, very favorable location, a country of a population of 9.6 million, so really, really small country in this way. However, so in the ranking of populations, Hungary ranks 95th among the countries. However, in the ranking of export capacity, it's ranking 34. So it's a really open economy. Export over GDP ratio is over 80%. So since it's a small market, we are really relying on our export and investment partners. So even if the country's size is small, we have seen fantastic investments recently, as Nicholas has mentioned. Basically, we have two record years in a row behind us in terms of foreign direct investment. And this is thanks to mainly Chinese investments. This is not coincidental at all, very much intentional, because a couple of years ago, the Hungarian government decided to keep and retain its main markets on the Western part of the world, which are very important for us, European Union, especially Germany, but also the United Kingdom, US as well. But we also had to find some new markets, some new possibilities. So we decided to open up to the East. East means mainly, but not solely, Asian countries. And I think these fantastic results in the foreign direct investments are thanks to this openness in which we were very vocal. And basically just last year, Hungary was the top European destination for Chinese FDI, and this was not the first but the second year, so not only 2024 but 2023 as well. 2023 we had the largest ever foreign direct investment coming from China. This is called CATL, the company. This is a battery manufacturer. I think they are the largest battery manufacturers in the world, and their footprint in Hungary is huge. The volume is more than 7 billion euros, and eventually, when the whole factory will be operational on the eastern part of Hungary, they will create approximately 9,000 new jobs. In Hungarian terms, this is a robust investment.
But I think there's a very interesting piece which underlines this. Obviously, there are tax benefits, there are government benefits. There's all sorts of reasons why a battery manufacturer from China or a Mercedes-Benz or a BMW can come to Hungary. But the recent one I saw was BYD, Build Your Dreams, which I think is a spectacular name for a car company. I just think it's lovely. But it's just moved its headquarters from the Netherlands to Hungary. It's not come from Shenzhen or anywhere else, it's come from the Netherlands to Hungary. So it means there's two competitive European forces. And it says a lot for me, and I'm a resident and a taxpayer in Hungary, which is quite nice to say, but it's very relevant to me that there are two underlying things that play into the advantage of Hungary. One is the simplicity of moving your business here. When I was at the European Bank, this was before the conglomerate of one trade organization. You literally had to deal with about 6 or 7 different organizations to get anything done, and it was hard. Now it's one organization, effectively, that wonderful American expression, you have one throat to choke to help you do all of this. And the other thing coming out of Apple's playbook, when they had a discussion at the annual general meeting a couple of weeks ago, it was said, are you in China because of low cost? And chief executive said, no, that was some time ago. We're in China because of the depth of resources. And when I look at the Hungarian playbook and staff and the quality and the multilingual nature of the country and the generation workforce that we've got there, I think it's a spectacular place. So I think congratulations to everybody that's made this happen. And I think you deserve everything that you've been getting in terms of foreign direct investments. Excellent.
Thank you so much for saying that, Nicola. So the country is really a stable and secure investment destination. The numbers just confirm this, I guess. So the present government put a lot of emphasis on creating a business-friendly environment, and I think it's very successful. I can come up with some numbers. So corporate tax is 9% flat. That's it. Yes, and you can even get some further reduction in corporate tax when you do a certain amount of investment. You can get some tax exemption, but also the social contribution that the employers pay are 13%. That's it. So it tends to be very simple, very understandable, and on top of these favorable taxes, a very easily available incentive package can also be available for new investments. So,
how do you feel about, given that your role is to help Hungarian companies expand, migrate, grow into the UK and further afield, how do you think the UK stacks up in this AI emerging economy versus going further afield to where Michael is in Silicon Valley or anything else? Do you think that there is still that charm of the UK? Do you still think there's that bulldog spirit of being able to do something? And you've got a beautiful likeness that we're both fairly small countries in compared with some of our bigger neighbours. What attraction do you see of the UK for Hungarian companies?
There is definitely. So I would say on a daily basis, there is at least one Hungarian company inquiring about how they could be successful on the UK market. And the goods and services they would offer are truly versatile. So it's high quality IT services, dog leash, food and beverage, everything is trying to get into the UK market. There's still a charm of the UK market, definitely. However, it's not an easy market, not only because of Brexit. It has made it a little bit more complicated, I would say, but I think it just because the competition is so big here, yeah. And the prices and the costs are so different compared to the ones in Hungary. Exporters and newcomers on the market, they must be really, really persistent, and they must have enough money and enough patience to start getting to be successful here. Yeah. I just want, if I may, You mentioned BYD earlier, Nicholas, and I wanted to add on something. So BYD has been with us since 2017, started on the northwestern part of Hungary with the bus production. And just 2 years ago, they decided to set up their consumer car manufacturing on the southern part of Hungary, which is a big hit. I think that's their first production site in the European Union. And just 2 weeks ago, that's what you mentioned, they decided to relocate their HQ, European HQ and R&D center to Budapest with job creation of another 2,000 people, which is fantastic.
But out of that 2,000 people,
Yeah.
over 300 of them are all in AI and robotics and drive shaft.
Exactly. High quality engineers.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Hungary is looking for now. There is a shift in our foreign direct investment policy, and we want to put more focus on quality rather than quantity.
Yeah,
So we're looking for more complex, more high value added projects, maybe less job creation, which is fine, as unemployment rate is around 4%, which is pretty low.
Very good.
So definitely we are looking for more complex projects. That's what I'm working on right now here in the UK, trying to put get into our scope some smaller but higher value added projects. And actually the sector doesn't matter. It can be medtech, it can be AI, it can be green economy, it can be anything.
I think
that fits.
I think that brings us on beautifully. Thank you very much indeed, Judith. I really appreciate the insight into what's going on in the UK and the relationship between Hungary and the UK and what's going on in Hungary itself. Thank you very much indeed for your time, and hopefully we'll get some questions at the end. Michael, I'm sorry, you probably got up the earliest and have drunk more coffee than anybody and waiting for us to join you, but I'm delighted to have you on the call. Hopefully you're still here and you can join me by the fireside.
I'm here. Thank you, Nicholas, for inviting me. Thank you, Susanna. It's a pleasure to be here.
So delighted to have you here. It would be really useful having heard from Susanna in terms of her role, and I'm naively thinking that they're quite similar in their roles, but you certainly are on the front line between Canada and the US. So I think you've been very busy. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. But would you be so kind just to give us a little overview of your background and some of the work I know you've been doing in Europe previously and now what you're doing in the US?
Certainly. So yes, I'm Consul Senior Trade Commissioner at the Consul General of Canada in Los Angeles. I'm part of the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service. So it's a very similar program that Judith just described for Hungary, where we support Canadian companies entering international markets and work with non-Canadian companies, international companies that want to invest in Canada and encourage those two-way direct flows. So it's been an exciting 100 first days here in LA, being in the United States as a Canadian diplomat. A lot of unprecedented things have happened in the relationship, to say the least. And maybe just to, quote our new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, saying, the relationship as it's been with Canada-US is over. And that's a lot to say. And I think that reflects how Canadians feel and Canadians' reactions to some of the rhetoric coming out of President Trump's White House and so on. So it's a big shock, I would say, to Canada, how the U.S. has approached the relationship, and it's caused some serious thinking about how we proceed going forward. I will start by saying that Canada will always be a close partner to the United States and a mutually beneficial partner to the United States. I mean, prior to this year, Canada's exports, 70% would go to the United States, but it's also important to recognize that over 32 to 36 states, the number shifts depending on the numbers. Canada, it's the number one market for those states. So in terms of U.S. Export markets, Canada is a major market for the United States in a variety of industries, whether it's in energy, automotive, agriculture, other areas as well. So it's been disruption. And to Paul's point earlier about how investment has paused, how things are starting to bite, and certain businesses are getting nervous about how things are going in the United States as the changing tariff environment is causing those disruptions. So I just wanted to get that out there in terms of how the environment has been disruptive and how it's causing a rethink. Maybe not so much at the policy level. A lot of our export diversification policies have been in place for some time, but now where they're being given new impetus and perhaps more support from the Canadian business sector and government and the public in general, but more focus on how to manage working with the United States, but also look at the rest of the world as well. Prior to being in the United States, I arrived here in Los Angeles 2 years ago. I was in Europe for 8 years. First, at our mission to the European Union in Brussels. I had a front row seat for the ratification of the Canada-EU CETA agreement, the free trade agreement between Canada and the EU. Also working on science and technology collaboration there. And after that, I was in Denmark at our embassy of Canada to the Kingdom of Denmark. So it was interesting to see, and echoing what Judith was saying about the opportunities in Europe and the growing interest between Canada and Europe. Even then, and at that, when I was first in Brussels, that was during the first Trump administration, and the pivot of Europe, who tended to overlook Canada as a partner in North America, suddenly realizing that maybe Canada's perhaps the more reliable partner in terms of policy, but also trade, and that's been stimulating a lot of bilateral trade and investment activity. In fact, even in the first few months of this year, I think trade between Canada and the EU is up. I want to say 20%. It's been a big increase as two-way trade is diverting to avoid the issues with the tariff uncertainty in the United States. While trade between Canada and the US, I think, is down about 5%, something like that. So you're already starting to see some of these shifts where they can happen relatively quickly. So it's interesting to see that, and being here in the United States and being here in California, US is a market of markets, and I think we're all familiar with how different parts of the US approach the world and policies differently. But California is very open to trade, very dependent on trade. The ports of LA and Long Beach are responsible for some 40% of US imports and exports. And a lot of that comes from Asia-Pacific. So far, the tariffs haven't bit too much because there's been a lot of stockpiling up until April. And now container traffic is way down at those ports. And we'll see how that starts to play out in supply chains as companies work through their inventories. And to Paul's point earlier, companies have been nervous, but they have been also not been saying too much because of avoiding retaliation, you might say, from the regime. But we're starting to see concerns about how supply chains will reorientate themselves and some of this medicine that companies are supposed to take to reorientate their trade. And I think from being here in California, I think this market is quite aligned with Canada when it comes to trade, and certainly some of the industries of focus as well. And I think you mentioned
Michael,
also, yeah.
And one thing, you're right in the epicenter of technology.
Mm-hmm.
So how's the technology corridor between Canada and Seattle? And what's been the attitude maybe where Donald Trump maybe has got ahead of the rest of the world and pivoted into the Gulf states, who are now spending a gargantuan amount of money on the forefront of AI? Do you feel that Canada needs to start thinking about strategy and where it's going and not being reactionary to what's happening out of the US administration, but really start to push its own strategy and get ahead?
I think you're right on that too. If you're looking at especially industries that don't rely on tariffs, like the tech sector,
Yep,
service-based industries in general. By the way, that's most of Canada-US trade is service-based and
yep.
unaffected by tariffs, perhaps more affected by immigration policy. And I think that's where Canada had been focusing before, and perhaps will even benefit more, having a relatively open and predictable path to talent recruitment, especially for high-skilled occupations like software engineers, AI specialists, for example. So I could anticipate, it was already happening, but even more activity where US-based companies from around the world who might want to expand their R&D capabilities to develop AI. Canada already has a very, very strong, some of the first founders of AI are based in Canada. And I will just mention that it was just a headline yesterday, Joshua Bigno, one of the founders of AI machine learning, announced a new nonprofit to focus on AI safety and how to develop AIs that are trustworthy, meaning they don't deceive the users, they don't fall into sycophancy. These kinds of things are some of the early issues we're seeing. So I think that's where you'll see Canada. There's been some policy movement, but I would say definitely on a catch-up basis to the EU or US are, and probably finding some sort of middle ground where you want to encourage AI adoption, but also do it in a responsible way. And there's a strong community in the research community and the policy community in Canada that's really focused on what is human-centric and responsible AI look like, and trying to carve out a space in that area. Prime Minister Carney's appointed a minister for AI and digital transformation. So it gives a sense of where, we'll see what that looks like, but at least at the cabinet level, there's a person focused on that. And we'll see what that looks like going forward. There has been in previous administration under Trudeau, there's been some focus on AI investments. We do have the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, the first national AI strategy in the world that was launched in 2018. So there's been some initiatives, but I think this will be going forward an area of focus. And I would say coming back to the United States, in terms of engagement with Silicon Valley, with the tech sector here in Southern California, we're still all in. And I would say Canadian companies do very, very well in this market in terms of attracting venture capital and working with the technology sector here. So I think in terms of collaboration with the US, we will still do that because it is by far the biggest source, and we're well positioned to leverage it, but maybe more for applications, maybe not necessarily in the US or in other areas. Yeah.
But it's quite interesting because AI seems to be around how much money you can throw at it. And when you look at the investments that have been talked about, I struggle to even work out how many zeros there are in the number that they quote in terms of how much they're going to throw at AI. But I start to wonder whether a country like Hungary or a country like the United Kingdom or a country like Canada can actually compete at that level, or is there a differentiated strategy that could be adopted, or maybe there is a different service infrastructure that the Canadian market should focus on rather than trying to chase something where it is just being outspent 10 to 1 in the Gulf states. And I find it fascinating for your perception of being in Los Angeles, being in Silicon Valley, being in that region. What is the technical relationship between Canada and the US? And is it a strong relationship? Is it a collegiate responsibility? And how do the two countries work together? And has it been affected by the Trump administration?
All great questions. I would say it is definitely a strong collaboration. It always has been in terms of U.S. tech giants operating, doing R&D in Canada, Canadian startups coming here, particularly to California, to attract capital. You're starting to see, and there has been a trend of circulation, so people going back and forth. And I would say since the beginning of the Trump administration, this is just anecdotally, more, I would say, maybe this is more on the clean tech side than AI per se, but certainly that concern about policies that might be disrupting R&D spending, disrupting funding to universities, disrupting access to talent in terms of the immigration system. If you can't predict whether your engineer can stay on, get their visa renewed, perhaps we should relocate those teams to Canada where you can predict whether or not they're going to get a work permit or permanent residency. So some of that hedging the bets and trying to keep going and having access to a deep talent pool and innovation ecosystem in Canada, I think is something that's going to continue. And that relationship with the United States will be probably the strongest for us. But I think there's also an opportunity to do more with the rest of the world. I would say in certain applications, I think in the energy sector, in clean tech, potentially in agriculture, in mining, we're starting to see, those areas which Canada's been traditionally strong in. You're also going to, I think, on the, again, like I said, on the AI safety side, the responsible use side, there's been a lot of interest in that and focus on Canada and some early collaboration with Europe on that as well. So I could see that being an area where Canada doubles down as well. And also too on, I would say, access to data sets. I think you need, in addition to huge reams of capital, you need access to data sets. And, I think the social media companies have an advantage because everybody's doing everything online with them all the time, so they can train their AI on all that activity. But for a certain specialized application, like whether it's and we see a lot of the companies that come to our office here in Los Angeles have developed AI models that work on very particular niche data sets that they've had access to because of what they were doing, whether it's in real estate or healthcare or other areas. And so these very purpose-built models have been trained up on certain things. And I think that's something where smaller countries can be strategic in how they offer access to their data in certain areas. I think that's an opportunity.
Yeah. And the last statement that I made, which was how diplomacy and design can co-author trade strategies that are more agile. Because I honestly think we sort of sat here for 40 years and then went, oh my God, Donald Trump's in power now. What are we going to do? Like it was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. And for some of it was a surprise. I'm not quite sure why, but more digital, because that's where the industry is going. But I think more sustainable and more human. So if AI means that there are going to be an awful lot of people with an awful lot of spare time, we're moving that direction anyway. And I think some of the sustainable policies that come out of Canada will be absolutely fascinating. So, Michael, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Really do appreciate it. I know it was a bit of a whirlwind tour, but thank you very much indeed. Judith, thank you. Paul, thank you. And I just wanted to open it up for the sort of last 5-7 minutes. If anybody in the group had any questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hands if you've got any questions. If anybody wants to ask anything of Judith, Paul, or Michael, please go ahead.
Well, first of all, hey, it's George Moen here. First of all, I'm impressed that, Paul Doherty literally is a rock star. That's awesome. And Michael, if you pay close attention, he dropped some serious gems there. He's given us a pathway of opportunities, particularly in the data set, which I think is unbelievably under focused or under hyped in terms of what the availability of these language models. I mean, I just recently saw a clip from Altman, and he said they are desperately scouring the planet trying to find data sets because, as an old Economist magazine said, data is the new oil. And I think that's a big step forward. So I think any company or any organization that has data has a new asset on their balance sheet that's not recognized. Again, data has to be carefully managed, but I think that gives an opportunity for many organizations to responsibly deploy data. The big guys are doing it, but the vast majority of data is not in the Disney databases or whatever. It's millions of companies across the planet, and that is in itself going to be a huge industry. And also, it's going to reshape balance sheets. So great insights from all of you. And I think that, Judith, for example, points out, and Nicholas and I know this well because we're kind of based there with our firm, is Hungary has so much opportunity. And again, if you're looking at globalization, like I know Steve Kelsey here is looking for connections in Europe for his business out of Western Canada. So I think these calls are very, very informative because it allows us to get insights pan-global. from different perspectives and educate ourselves, because we are moving in a much different space. And I just want to thank everybody for talking about it. And Joe is a very good friend of mine, Joe Wilmot, and he brags incessantly about his son Michael, who is a rock star in the Canadian world. So thanks very much, and well done, Susanna and Nicholas. I love these presentations. George Moen out.
Thank you, Joel.
Um,
Yes, one
yep.
question. Go ahead.
No, I'm just interested in if anyone, Gurnam, for example, I think that you might.
Yes.
All right, please carry on.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, fantastic. This is my second event attending, and every event has a different twist and so much more to learn. Just for context, I run accelerators for health and social care businesses here in the UK. I'm also looking to do the same in Kenya, and I'm in early discussions looking at a very different market, and the focus is primarily on marketplace and commercialization. So that's my focus, and we're in early discussions with Susanna around doing similar projects for Hungarian businesses as well as UK. So my question, I think, and it's probably prompted from what Judith said about the skills gap in terms of technology and AI, and particularly because I was in a meeting yesterday where I don't think that this is a gap that perhaps Hungary based, but I think it's a global gap, and perhaps if I open it up to everyone, what is this? Is there a strategy or a plan to kind of really pull together some way in which country level or global level that we're looking to perhaps bridge those gaps? And I won't sort of ask beyond that because I'll probably start trying to think of some solutions, but really opening up that question to all the speakers. Do I need to ask slightly?
Well,
Michael, do you want
can
to,
certainly say what
or Judith, do you want to respond to that one?
Well, just coming up with a couple of examples what Hungary has done throughout the last couple of years in terms of changing the educational system based on the requirements of the business side. So one thing is in the tertiary education, STEM subjects are preferred compared to the ones, let's say, art, literature, law, and so on. So more STEM places at the university are state financed than before, because we could see just like this investment that we just spoke about, the BYD 2000, almost 2000 engineers will be required in a few years' time, then more and more engineers need to be produced in Hungary, but not only in the tertiary education, but also in the secondary education. There was a huge shift. We changed our system on the German-based vocational or dual education training system. So this, in the secondary education, part of the education is at schools, and the other part of the secondary education is in workshops at company sites. So it doesn't go quickly because these are huge systems that we need to change. But I think a key factor is recognizing the need on time as early as we can, and then to brave enough to bring in new initiatives in such big systems. I'm not sure whether it's an answer to your question, but this is something that I had to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the UK, if I think back, nearly 15, possibly even more years, where I recall when I was running a business and next door was a Carphone warehouse, and I remember seeing a lot of international employees there. It was pretty evident because they're all technical employees on short, I would say up to 2-year contracts. So the strategy was to employ internationally and bring that skill set. Because I respect the fact that we've got to educate, because we want to create jobs of the future for our own young people, but also the need is now. And so how open are you as a country?
I think the service industry is a very good example for Hungary, because Morgan Stanley, Vodafone, people like that all have their service centers in Budapest. And the reason why they do is there is a depth of talent, and the talent is multilingual. So it's not unusual for a 27-year-old graduate out of university to speak 6 languages. So you don't have to employ 6 different people to speak to 6 different calls coming in. You pick up the phone, and that individual, like my wife, will switch from one language to another language to another language to another language. I think maybe the gap which needs to be strengthened in Hungary is the technology layer, because a lot of the technology companies and the youngsters are being educated in Hungary and then feeling as though they need to move abroad to further their career or to further their depth in AI capabilities. So I think there's a bit of disconnect there between the nascent language value, which is definitely Hungarian, but the technology supremacy kept in country that doesn't want to leave. So I think that's an interesting place. But Vodafone, obviously, they've sold their business here to
BlackRock, Morgan Stanley,
worthwhile.
MSCI. I'm just coming up with some further names, or just 2 British, if I may mention: British Telecom, British Petrol, Diageo. They have huge business service centers in Hungary. Actually, these business service centers employ more than 100,000 people and contribute to the Hungarian GDP with more than 3%. So very, very
it's a big market, very big market.
It is very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate the questions. I know that it's the early part of the day for a lot of people in Vancouver, so we won't take any more of your time.
Nicholas, it's
yes,
George.
please go ahead.
Michael had a comment on your last question, and I was interested in hearing that.
Yes, please go ahead, Michael.
Just to say, there's kind of 2 things I'd highlight for Canada on that. We do have our global skills strategy, which is definitely targeting skilled immigration to continue coming to Canada, even though certain aspects of Canadian immigration have been tightened up notably on what was perhaps over generous student visas that were being not used for studying in Canada per se, and other things. Unskilled. Skilled very much remains open, and certainly AI technicians will be one of the talent areas that can get their work permit or permanent residency in Canada very quickly. The other thing I'll mention too, in terms of developing talent, is the MyTax program, which, if Canadian companies are hopefully aware of it, they should be. It's a cost-sharing arrangement to access talent out of Canadian universities, colleges, to work on innovation-specific projects within a company. The company defines a project, they get the researcher for periods of 4 months at a time, and the MyTax program pays half the salary of that researcher. And international companies can have access to this too. For example, we've seen non-Canadian companies that set up operations in Canada leverage MyTax to get some of their first technical employees on certain things. So those 2 things can be very interesting in terms of that talent.
I agree. Thank you. That's perfect. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. That's very useful.
Elke would like to ask something. Elke.
Yeah, I was just saying, I was just at the Web Summit last week here in Vancouver, where they had people from all over 100 countries in the world. And the Polish people, the booth, they were sharing this software where you can put a earpiece on and you can speak up to 5 different languages. Like it'll automatically translate. So you can have meetings with people from all different countries and you can still understand each other.
Wonderful. Thank you. I could do with that, that's for sure. And I will then know when I'm in trouble at home. Okay, thank you very much indeed to everybody. Thoroughly enjoyed this session. Hopefully you enjoyed it too. It was really insightful, entertaining. So thank you very much indeed. Judith, Michael and Paul, Susanna, thank you very much indeed to everybody. And we're going to move the event to the second Tuesday of next month, but please keep a lookout on all the social media and we'll let everybody know who the speakers are going to be. But thank you, great session, thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed, Susanna, Judith, Michael, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.